I've got your ultimate Hickman era X-Men reading guide. Hello, friends. Welcome back to John's Comics with Kids. I'm John, and I'm here to talk about an era of X-Men that is often derided, maybe. There's a lot of big fans like myself, but then I think at the same time, it was divisive, right? Some people loved it and some people didn't. And there's a lot of things here to discuss. Firstly, I want to talk a little bit about what this era is. Jonathan Hickman comes in to X-Men, which has kind of been hit or miss for quite a significant time. And he wants to kind of reinvent the wheel. This means he is playing and coaching at the same time. He wants to run certain titles, oversee the big plots, and then at the same time have several teams, artists and writers, working underneath him, crafting stories in his playground, right? So this is a very new paradigm. It's almost like and Marvel editorial crew inside of Marvel editorial. And this was a very big change up. And there were so many titles, 10 titles a month in some cases. So this was unwieldy, very challenging. And I think ultimately the reason why people didn't like it in some cases is because of the design, right? Too many things to read and a sense or a feeling because we're comic collectors that we have to read and enjoy all of it. And that really wasn't the design, I think, from Hickman's perspective. He had overarching things that connected pieces, but his expectation was not that you read every single title, and it wasn't necessary for understanding the comics. What I think would have been better going in was two pieces of information. Number one, you don't need to read the main X-Men title. And this is kind of mind-blowing. You think the flagship title inside of his universe would be vital reading. But the truth is, Hickman viewed it as a sort of anthology book, each issue not connecting to the next, and sometimes scattering across time and space and different things. It was very abstract. And the problem is, people went in expecting a traditional X-Men team comic book. And that's just not a reasonable expectation with a writer like Jonathan Hickman. He is going to give you what he wants to do. And inside this universe, that was his one little corner where he had complete creative control, along with Pepe Larraz on art. And he just dabbled. He took a little bit of the flavor over here and a little bit of something over here, and he created a new volume every month that felt like a wonderful peek into different corners of this universe without feeling like a necessity to read because it didn't have an overarching theme and characters weren't consistent issue to issue. I loved it for that reason, but if you went in with a different expectation, that would absolutely frustrate and make you want to stop reading all this stuff because then you feel like, well, I don't understand what's happening here because they're mentioning something from X Factor and they're mentioning something from, X Force, and how am I supposed to keep up with all this? And that wasn't the expectation. So, my number one guide rule is don't necessarily have to read the main X-Men title at any point, even after the relaunch when another writer took over. Second, I think people went in hoping to have like characters to follow. So if you were a big, Cyclops fan, you wanted to have a Cyclops book, right? That wasn't the best way to read the Hickman era. And here's my number one piece of advice of what you should do, and that is pick a writer that you would like and follow them. And this was something I tried to tell people a bunch as they were getting into this universe, or they found an issue or a character or something they liked. Follow that writer. And I will be the first to admit there were writers I loved and writers I did not. And there were, series that I loved and series I did not. So you don't have to love it all and you don't have to read it all, but pick the ones you love. So for me, top of my list was Al Ewing, and I loved the work he did. So obviously, jumping into Sword and X-Men Red, those were two of the pieces that Al Ewing really crushed. And obviously, I'm a Storm fan, so these books have her as a central component all the way through. So you're going to win me over in a big way. But Al also sort of became this wonderful cosmic viewpoint for the Hickman era. He was dealing with, agencies that were guarding the planet and then eventually the life and politics of Mars and all of these things. It was a very cosmic centered book. And if you liked that, if you like Al Ewing as a writer, I think this was a series of books that were fun to follow. And for me as a Storm fan, her being the focus of the books made it all the better. Cameos from characters like Doctor Doom, Sunspot. There were a lot of really fun, side plots, and, Cable might come in and out, but the book as its focus was sort of cosmic politics. And I dug that. I thought that was really well executed. And the way Storm was central in that was very exciting. So yeah, Al Ewing was high on the list for me. I'm also a Cy Spurrier fan. And the way he took Nightcrawler in and gave Nightcrawler this epic story worked really well for me. So I would follow Nightcrawler, and he did a Way of X series, followed by his Legion of X. And again, all sort of in and around Nightcrawler. Now, he's not the only character. Legion came in and he was an important part. Sinister, of course, Destiny. So there were a lot of other characters here, but his journey as a writer is what I would recommend you follow. And of course, it sort of culminated with Uncanny Spider-Man, where Nightcrawler is hiding out in New York City. And what better way to hide in New York City than to be yet another Spider-Man? Lots of Spider-Men, right? And then, yeah, X-Men Blue Origins was also another issue Cy Spurrier did. So for me, I loved what Cy Spurrier did, and it was very invigorating and exciting. But maybe those are the kinds of books you don't necessarily want. Books that are more philosophical, less team action oriented. If you wanted a team action book, then Benjamin Percy was your guy because his X Force was that book, and it was dark and it was different and it was intense and it was violent. And of course, I think it's why he got to do some stuff with Wolverine later that was so well received. So in the Hickman era, that stuff I think was still there. If you were a Wolverine fan, I think a lot of people felt really rewarded by what Wolverine got to do. And Benjamin Percy is your guy for that. He had several titles using the character, among others. Obviously, you got Colossus and Beast here as well, Domino. So again, I think the rule of read everything, read it in order doesn't apply in this era. It was definitely a more diverse universe than that with more things going on. And I think following certain writers paid off. I also mentioned that there are writers I didn't like. I struggled with Teenie Howard all through this era. And there would be issues I loved that she wrote, like from Excalibur or X of Swords, but then there would be others that just fell flat for me. And so I know that she was closely connected to what was going on with Hickman at the time and giving him support as an editor, writer, and all the things he was doing. But for me, as a writer, her stuff just didn't resonate with me, and I struggled to get into it and to sort of appreciate what was going on there. And it might have been the fantasy X-Men, related stuff, versus darker team books like Hellions had a gritty, dark sense of humor, and Sinister being the kind of sinister guy that he was, and Havoc and Madeline Pryor. It had a fun, twisted, dark mentality that I think if you were looking for a book with that, Hellions was a fun title to follow. So I think it really depends on what you wanted to get out of it and which writers resonated with you. And of course, high on that list for me was Marauders. I think ultimately this became the title that nobody expected, right? Jerry Duggan did such a phenomenal job with Kitty Pryde and her pirate misfits, and it was not a book that people expected to be the best comic coming out of the original launch, right? The Dawn of X titles seemed like that was a lesser choice, but it resonated more, and people that were there for it really got into it. Of course, you have to start with House and Powers, right? And sadly, the same way we kind of ended in that same vein. I think there was some beauty to that. And then lastly, I wanted to mention Immortal X-Men. Kieran Gillen came in and I think gave me the book I ultimately wished the original X title that they started with Hickman could have been, which is this book about the people at the top with the most power in the X universe. These characters that are controlling the big choices and decisions in and around this universe. Your Magnetos, your Charles Xaviers. I think this book had all the backstabbing, all the Game of Thrones intrigue, and it should have been the flagship title, but it came around too late. I think by then people had been so burned by the previous incarnations, whether it was whichever incarnation of X-Men you want to call, by then they gave up. And that ultimately is fair. That's a fair response to this series. But I do think in time, I hope this is an era in X-Men lore that is regarded better than I think it is right now. It's a mixed bag for sure. There are titles that I don't love. There were titles that had expectations that were different from mine. So I went into X of Swords expecting to see like characters dying and this sort of like intense, purge of the mutant roster. And instead, we got this quirky comedy. And if you were frustrated by that switch, I think you could instantly throw that book across the room. When I got around to the concept that they were doing a comedy, I got a lot more out of it. And that book became something that I enjoyed a lot more. The character of Apocalypse and his journey, I got a lot out of that. And again, if you can zero in on a writer who really nails a certain corner of the X-Men universe, that's what works best. So that's my reading guide to you. There are a few recommendations, a few titles, and then of course we have those events that come along, right? Those events that sort of take over the universe, and now you can't do anything but read all the Sins of Sinister stuff. So that's the curse of modern Marvel and DC. And I don't know that there's any real antidote to something like that. But if you enjoy some of those events, I do think that there were several that really hit hard and had some really powerful things to say about some of those characters. So maybe possibly those things like X of Swords you could get more out of when you get near the crux of those characters and those stories. So fingers crossed. Uh, Thank you for checking this out. I hope you hit the like button and subscribed and checked out some of the other content we've got going on here. I want to thank my channel members, of course, those people that help me keep the lights on around here, keep the StreamYard going so that I can do my live streams that I do every week. Definitely hit the notification bell so that you can be there for those live streams that I have regularly with friends around the community. And of course, remember the channel members are eligible for the big giveaway I do at the end of every month. Hopefully someone wins something that they really love, but there's usually a trade paperback. There's usually some variant comics and some fun things that they can enjoy. Let me know down below. How did you feel about the Hickman era? Were there books that you really loved, titles you really enjoyed, artists or writers that you followed? And how would you recommend to other people that they read this series?